Hello heroes and villains, welcome to Multiverse. I've been trying to make a video talking about the story in DCUO Online for some time. Sadly, it's a bit of a challenging subject because sadly, ultimately, at the end of the day, I will probably end up insulting some people. Now, I don't know who wrote the story. Is it all the devs that got together in a story meeting and came up with the story? Is it, do DCUO Online have an official writer who actually writes the material for them? Or is it an intern who did that during his lunch break? I have no idea. At the end of the day, it does not matter. Sadly, these days, a lot of creative have a very thin skin. So if I criticize the story even just a little bit, I'll probably end up insulting someone. Sadly, we have to talk about it. We have no choice. Now, I'm sure that for some people, the story doesn't matter. What matters is probably the gameplay. So if they have new missions to play, if the gameplay is good enough, some people probably don't care about the story. Sadly, one of the main selling points about rebranding the episodes into chapters was the story. Was that DCUO Online from now on would be more story focused. So we have to talk about the story. Now, with the rebranding of the episodes into chapters, the devs decided to add a story section to the website where basically every so often they will add a new chapter to the story. Sadly, the early blogs were not so well received. There even was a thread on the forums where some people were saying that it was laughable. I wouldn't go that far, but it was very amateurish at best. There was some very basic, let's call it mistakes that were made in the early stories that kind of showed that whoever wrote the story did not know much about the storytelling 101. It's sad, but that's how it is. A very obvious example is during the first blog, Batman enters a penthouse, and we have no idea whose penthouse that is. Then within the penthouse, he meets Catwoman, and we assume, sort of guess that it seems to be Catwoman's penthouse, but the truth is by the end of the story, we don't even know. We know he goes to the penthouse, we know Catwoman is there, but for all we know, Catwoman is there to burgle the place. Now, the simplistic way to establish the penthouse would have been to have just a line saying Gotham City Night, Catwoman's penthouse. Although it doesn't have to be on the nose like that, like it could have been Batman enters the penthouse. On one side we have a whole bunch of cat statues. On the other side on the wall we have a whole bunch of famous cat paintings. And in the middle of the room you have the jewel of Kathmandu. And right there and then we would know that, okay, this is Catwoman's penthouse. It would not have been that difficult to properly establish that it is Catwoman's penthouse. Although it could be also that maybe whoever wrote the blogs are used to writing for video games. And in video games, you don't have to describe the room. You don't have to describe anything. People enter the room and they actually see what it is. Like basically, if we had been in the game and if we had entered Catwoman's penthouse, we probably would have seen some Catwoman. The way the room would have been decorated would have told us that, okay, this is Catwoman's room. This is Catwoman's penthouse. But when you write the story without any visual, then you have to establish visually what people are seeing and establish also visually where people are. It is something that is very basic. Anyone who knows anything about storytelling 101 should know that. Sadly nowadays there's a lot of quote-unquote writers who don't even know that. Although to their credits, they seem to be improving at least a little bit. In the latest blog, they did establish the sector where they are. They established that the action actually happens on Mogo. I use action very loosely because there's actually no action at all. So at the end of the day, the story blogs are supposed to make the transition from one chapter to the next. For example, the previous blogs we had before were making the transition between the Harley Quinn vs. Apocalypse DLC to the Day of Reckoning DLC. It was a bit misleading. A lot of people thought that the next DLC would be a Batman-related DLC, and as it turns out, it wasn't a Batman DLC at all. They had used Batman because the story starts in the Apocalypsean version of Gotham with Harley Quinn vs. Apocalypse. So being in Gotham, they had to use the Batman somehow. But somehow that made people think that the next DLC would be about the Batman, and that wasn't the case at all. Again, it was just to make a transition from the previous DLC to the new Day of Reckoning DLC. And here we can expect the same. So basically we've got 2 blogs so far to make the transition from the Day of Reckoning DLC to the next DLC. Sadly, we don't have any information about the next DLC just yet. Based on the 2 blogs we just got, you would think that the next DLC might be Lantern related, but again, based on the previous blogs we got, that made us think that there would be a Batman DLC, and maybe this is misleading as well. We're gonna have to wait and see for that. I was waiting and waiting to hopefully get information about the next DLC, but it seems that we're gonna have to wait some more. So we got 2 blogs so far leading to the next DLC. The first blog is pretty much a training session with Green Lantern and the Atom that are training Esmeralda and the Evil Reckoning, who's now a Indigo Lantern. Now, why would we have the Atom in a training session with the Lanterns? Quite simply, once upon a time, the Atom was an Indigo Lantern, even if it was just for a short time. So that's why the Atom is there. Then we have our friend John Stewart, who's obviously Green Lantern. And we have Esmeralda as a Blue Lantern, and the Reckoning as an Indigo Lantern. So we have them in some sort of a training session in the Microverse. Yeah, it's not the Microverse. The Microverse is the Marvel version. But I forget what the name is for the DC version, so let's call it the Microverse for now. So they have a training session in the Microverse, but then the training session ends with John Stewart getting some sort of message, of warning, and he has to go to Mogo. Once on Mogo, he meets with Kilowog, and apparently there was some sort of unprovoked attack, some evil unprovoked attack that has something to do with fear somehow. So that means that they have to go talk to Sinestro, and as it turns out, they decide that the best person to go talk to Sinestro is Hal Jordan. So John Stewart calls Hal Jordan, he tries to convince him to go talk to Sinestro. Big conflict here. Hal Jordan says no at first, but then he ends up saying yes. And that's pretty much how the thing ends. Hal Jordan leaves to, we assume, go talk to Sinestro. There's a few things that bothered me about those blogs, and I couldn't put my finger on it until recently. The first thing is, one thing we see in stories a lot these days is they're trying to make slice of life stories. So they'll have characters on Tuesday night, it's laundry night, they'll do their laundry while they're eating a bowl of ice cream or something. These are the kind of stories they try to tell these days. Or you'll have stories into characters in a restaurant that are just chatting for the whole issue. And food seems to be an important part of those slice of life stories. Food somehow seems to be important with modern comic book writers or modern writers period. And here it's no exception. So we have our friend Hal Jordan who's having some sort of barbecue when he does receive the call from John Stewart. And again, at first, he doesn't really want to go. He tries to say that maybe someone else should go. But ultimately, they decide that, yeah, Hal Jordan should be the one who goes. So John Stewart asking Hal Jordan to go, Hal Jordan saying, I don't want to go, then deciding to go. That was the big conflict of the story. Which brings me to another point that bothered me with those blogs. There's no conflict. For quite some time now, and it's not just with DCUO, we see that in comics, we see that in TV shows, in movies. They come up with stories where there's no conflict at all. Normally in superhero stories, the conflict is at the heart of the story. And in superhero stories, historically, the way you solve a conflict, you punch the Joker on the nose. That's pretty much how you solve most problems in comics. At least that used to be how it was. Nowadays, sadly, they're doing everything not to solve any conflict this way. Actually, they're doing everything they can not to have any conflict to begin with. Or when they do have a conflict, to try to find a way to resolve the conflict without punching the Joker on the nose. It's sad, but that's the state we're in right now. And sadly, stories without conflict are pretty boring stories, which again, sadly, is something we see over and over and over these days. And it would seem that this is the direction that the new devs are taking with their storytelling in DC Universe Online. And even when there is some conflict, for example, when we try to quote-unquote save a Voivode from the Evil Reckoning, there's nothing we can do. We enter the room, and then there's a cinematic that starts, and there's nothing we can do to prevent Voivode's fate. Usually in the story, our character would be the main character in the story. It would be the main focus of the story. But it would seem that with this new DLC, with this new, I guess, story-focused approach, we're actually an incidental character in the story. The real main character in the story were Voivode, the Reckoning, and Esmeralda, the Blue Lantern. It's as if the devs themselves were playing the game with their character, with Esmeralda. Yeah, I know it's Esperanza, but for some reason I started calling her Esmeralda and it stuck, so from now on she's Esmeralda, the Blue Lantern. So it's as if the devs are playing the game through those characters, and we're the incidental character that follows their character around, and we have no impact on the story. Again, when we reach a Voivode who's being tortured by the evil Reckoning, there is nothing we can do. We end up in a cinematic, and there's nothing we can do. It's a sin that a lot of games are committing. Sometimes there'll be scripted event that happens during cinematics, and your characters cannot really do anything. And sadly, it is, even if other games do it, it is still a sin. Like you don't make a game to have the characters not be able to prevent whatever's going on. If you want to prevent them from interfering, you have to find better ways than getting them stuck in a cinematic where they cannot do anything. So in some previous DLC and some previous missions, basically our character would be the main character, but sometimes it would have the Batman following us, or Cyborg, or the Flashpoint Batman. But we were the main character, and we had NPCs following us to help us out. Here it would seem that the main characters were the NPCs, and we were the NPCs just helping them out. Now, if the devs want to create their own characters and play DC Universe Online, they can do that. But it would seem that they've decided to play the game through their own NPCs that they've created, and we're just following them around. Also, another sin that they've made is that they've created a mystery that was impossible to solve. Now, they built this whole big mystery about the whole exobyte killer, and it was almost set up like a whodunit, like we were supposed to try to guess who the evil mystery killer was. But at the end of the day, that was impossible to solve because it was a brand new character that we had never seen before. And the few clues they tried to leave around, like there was the clue about the blue light, which ended up being the Blue Lantern. But there was also a briefing, there was a clue about the exobyte killer. But again, it was a brand new character that we didn't know about, that we knew nothing about. So whatever clue they left behind, those clues meant nothing because it was a brand new character, so it was impossible to guess who the character was. We did not even know the character existed. If it had been some, I don't know, some clues like question marks, we could have sort of tried to guess, oh, maybe it's the Riddler, or maybe it's the Question. Did the Question turn evil? If it had been like some sort of ha ha ha, could it have been the Joker? Could it have been Harley Quinn? But again, the clues that were left behind had no meaning because we did not even know who the character was. And talking about new characters, that brings us to another sins they've committed, another storytelling 101 mistake they made, is that they didn't do a very good job establishing the new characters. Especially in the case of Voivode. Spoiler alert, in case you don't know, Voivode gets killed, and we don't care because we know nothing about that character. It's a brand new character, and it's a character that was poorly established. Heck, they obviously the character is supposed to have some sort of powers because she's being killed by the exobyte killer. So obviously Voivode has some sort of exobytes into her, but we have no idea what her powers were. Like I think her powers are mentioned. There's one line maybe mentioning that she has powers. That she says something like that the exobyte killers is hunting people who have powers like us, something like that. But again, we never know what Voivode's powers are. It would have been very easy to establish Voivode's power. In one of the many missions we play early in the DLC, there could have been one mission where Voivode comes with us and we actually see her use her powers. Sadly, that never happens. So we are introduced to her character, we don't know what her powers are, we barely know her backstory, we know that her mom grounded her at some point, and we sort of assume that there's some sort of relationship between her and Jack, and that's pretty much it. So ultimately, Voivod ends up being like a red shirt in Star Trek, a character that was created only to be killed by the evil Reckoning, but we don't really know anything about the character, so who cares? The devs seems to really be in love with their own ideas. They seem to really love the new characters that they've created for themselves, but they don't seem to have thought things through. Now, creating new characters in itself is fine. The problem though is that no one wants to play DC Universe Online for Voivod. No one wants to play DC Universe Online for Esmeralda the Blue Lantern. These characters are not a draw. If people get attracted to DC Universe Online, it will be for Superman, it will be for Batman, it will be for the Flash, heck, even Wonder Woman. But Voivod, no one knows that character. Esmeralda the Blue Lantern, the Reckoning, the Indigo Lantern, no one knows those characters. These characters are complete unknown, so it's not going to be a draw for 99.999% of the player base. Yeah, I'm sure there's one player out there who's raising their hands saying, I care about those characters. You're the exception of the exception of the exception of the exception. And yes, I'm sure someone will say the older devs created new characters as well. Yes, they created Titanic Trenton, a character that we encounter in one side quest, and that's it. Or we encounter it in the open world because there is one side quest with the character. But they didn't make a time capsule for Titanic Trenton. They did not make an entire DLC built around Titanic Trenton. Here we have an entire DLC that was built around Esmeralda, the Reckoning, and Voivod. And even worse, it seems that we're going to get 4 DLCs built around Esmeralda and the Reckoning. And the plan right now seems to be to give us 3 DLCs per year. So at the very least, we'll be stuck with those characters for the next year. If you love those characters, you might be doing the happy dance right now. If you don't care about those characters, it's going to be a long year. Which I guess brings us to one of the drawbacks of having storylines in multiple parts, is that if the storyline is great, great, you're going to get the storyline for the next year. If you don't like the storyline, if the storyline is, let's say, not so good, getting that storyline for a whole year or more, for actually more than a year, that'll be rough. That'll be a tough pill to swallow. Also, it was a bit strange to hear some of the devs talk about the multi-part storyline. Basically, they were talking as if we never had a storyline that was in multiple DLCs before. They were talking as if it was a brand new thing that never happened in DC Universe Online. Now, it could be that this was hyperbole. It could be that they were trying to oversell the idea of having storylines in multiple DLCs and multiple parts. But we had storylines in multiple parts before. Way back when, we had the War of Light Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. We had the Amazon Fury Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Heck, the Metal storyline lasted 5 DLCs. So we had storylines in multiple parts before. Not to mention also there are story threads that were left unresolved at some point that were resolved later on. For example, with Black Adam, there was this story very early on with Black Adam and his wife, and it took basically years and years until we got to the Sins of Black Adam to sort of conclude that story. We had the same thing with the Riddler. We had this mission with the Riddler way back when, and then with the mission with the DLC Riddled with Crime, then we got some sort of resolution to the Riddler storyline. So seeing them talk about the multiple part storylines as if it's something that we never had before, that was kind of strange to see. Again, it could be that they were just trying, they just had their salesman hat on, and they were trying to oversell DC Universe Online to people. That could be. Also, it could be that we have some devs who have been with DC Universe Online for less than a year, maybe a year at this point. It could be that maybe they did not know that. Maybe they did not know that way back when we had Halls of Powers Part 1, 2, and 3. That seems unlikely, but I guess that's not impossible. Now again, it could be that some of you guys don't care about the story. If the gameplay is good, if we have new missions, maybe that's all you care about. But the story does bring a little something, even though, yes, this is an MMO, and at the end of the day, you just want to play missions and defeat evil NPCs. If you have a good storyline, it kind of raises the DLC a little bit. It makes the DLC a little bit better than just going mindlessly through missions. But again, one of the selling point of the new chapters structure as opposed to the episodes, one of the selling points was that it would be more story focused. Although I wouldn't say that it's more story focused than what we had before. With the Earth 3 DLC, we had a pretty darn good DLC with a pretty darn good story, and we had a pretty good focus on the story with that DLC. And even better than the latest DLC we had is that the characters were already established. Like, they did not have to establish the characters in the DLC. That was already done way back when in the comics. That's one of the advantages of using already existing characters. Like, if you put Ultraman in the game, people know who Ultraman is. And if somehow they don't know, they can go back and read some comics and have a whole bunch of backstory about Ultraman. The same with Allman, the same with Johnny Quick, and the entire crime syndicate of America. When you have a new character like Voivode or Esmeralda the Blue Lantern, all you have is what we have in the game. That's all the backstory we have with those characters. And sadly, the devs, either they do not know how to properly establish a new character, or they just couldn't do it for some reason. Also, something that I have a hard time understanding is that DC Universe Online pays good money to use the DC license. They pay good money to use characters like Batman, like Superman, like The Flash. So it's a bit strange that they're paying that good money to use those characters, and they're barely using them. They're going out of their ways not to use them, and here in this case again, to create their own characters, as opposed to using characters that they pay good money to use in DC Universe Online. If you're paying good money to use the DC Universe, if you're paying good money for characters like Batman, like Superman, use those characters. But somehow it seems that they don't want to do that. Now, I was pleasantly surprised with the Superman Day event. I was pleasantly surprised that we got the electric slimline costumes, the blue one and the red one from our friend Superman. I guess this is baby steps, I suppose. But again, they pay good money for a license, for the DC Universe, for Superman, for Batman, and there's so many. Let's assume that for some reason they cannot give us the iconic version of Superman because DC doesn't want them to. There are so many Elseworld Superman costumes that they could use, and they don't use them. Again, the electric blue and electric red costumes seems to suggest that maybe they will try to do better. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. I guess we'll know for sure once we get the next DLC, and once we get other events like Batman Day, Wonder Woman Day. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see for that. So it is a bit early to talk about the story. I was hoping to be able to talk about the story with the next DLC, but it seems that we've been waiting and waiting for information about the next DLC, and it would seem that we will have to wait a little bit longer. Again, we only have the one DLC in the various blogs, so I was hoping to get at least 2 DLCs to be able to talk about the story focus that DC Universe Online is supposed to have nowadays. I guess once we do get a few more DLCs, I'll have to make a second video talking about the story in DC Universe Online. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see for that. And a question that I'm sure a lot of you guys will be asking is when will we get the next DLC? All we really know is that supposedly they are trying to get back to 3 DLCs per year. So if I was to take a guesstimation, I would guesstimate that we might get the next DLC towards the end of May. But the truth is, we don't know so far. As soon as I have information about that, I'll let you guys know about it.